It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. We are joined by everybody in the comments' favorite person that appears on the podcast, as the comments for this episode or any of the previous episodes that he has been on will tell you. Steelers DB, Derrick Bell, joining the show. What's going on, pal?
What's going on, man? Yeah, I'm excited to talk some ball. I have been paroling the comments, especially just to get a Denzel Mims joke off yesterday. But yeah, I'm excited to get on here.
You got as many likes. You got almost as many likes on that comment as the show itself did.
Well, I was sitting there scrolling my YouTube feed, and like I was looking at the thumbnail, and of course I recognized the pattern of it. And I was sitting there looking at the picture, thinking to myself, who in the world is that? And then I read the title and I was like, oh, that's the biggest contribution he's had in Pittsburgh. But yeah. Shout out to all the Denzel Mims pre-draft truthers, man. It was a tough day for
all into that category.
Tough day for that community yesterday.
Yep. Really liked him coming. That was the same year as Claypool.
Yep.
I really liked Mims coming out of Baylor. But anyways, neither here nor
there. Who else was in that draft class?
A lot of other players, but who are you referring to?
Only the entire Steelers fan base's favorite player.
Trying to think of who that is right now.
Brandon Ayuk.
Oh, gotcha. Oh. Slightly different.
Yeah, there was
career paths.
Yeah, I was like Michael Pittman Jr., T. Higgins. There was a lot of receivers that are really good in that draft class. Anyways, let's dive into this.
Jefferson was in that draft class too, taking 2 spots ahead of Denzel Mims.
There you go. We talked about the high pedigree. It's still in this receiver room now. With that move being made today with Denzel Mims, another move was announced with it that we necessarily didn't see coming. Trenton Thompson also released at this time. This one's a little bit different to me, though, because we saw Trenton Thompson play in the regular season last year, had to step up, kind of like we didn't know what to expect when he got in there. But he played at, a baseline or above baseline level, much more than what you would have expected to get from Trenton Thompson. Obviously suffered the neck injury that we originally thought was just a stinger. Obviously much more serious than that. He opened up about that a little bit this offseason when talking about it. Didn't get surgery, was just rehabbing it. But this is a player that I thought would at least get to camp and compete for like that 4th safety spot.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that we saw Trenton Thompson release. I was not surprised. I mean, I wasn't sitting there like saying yesterday that, Denzel Mims is going to get cut. But if you named, said, hey, the Steelers are going to cut somebody today, and you giving me 10 names, I probably would have picked Denzel Mims. I would not have picked Trenton Thompson. Now, I didn't have him on my latest 53-man roster projection either. I think there's definitely some uncertainty about the neck injury from last year. It was, like you said, originally thought to be a stinger, turned out to be something a lot more serious. I don't know that we've ever gotten like an actual diagnosis, but he said to Nick earlier this offseason he didn't have surgery on it. He wanted to go that route, and he was at minicamp and OTAs. He looked like pretty much a full participant, but it was clear that I wasn't seeing like the same guy this spring that I saw on the field last fall. So I don't know if he isn't 100% or they're still concerned about the neck injury or if it was something else or what. But I think that's a guy that can play in the NFL if he's healthy. And so I am a little surprised to see him cut loose at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, too, like you mentioned, that 4th safety spot's a little bit unknown. I think it does potentially open up the door for a guy like Ryan Watts to make the roster, depending on, what they do with him at camp. I do agree that, it does seem kind of strange that they would, make that sort of move just because I think he's good enough definitely to take into camp. But we don't know really the health parameters that are kind of going on behind the scenes. I think, with Thompson, I thought he played a really good game. I think in that second game against Cincinnati, he had an interception. I think it's like the curl flat defender, really nice play. But I do think down the stretch of the season, like even when we did see him play, prior to the injury or what have you, there was some stuff that I was kind of noticing just from an athletic standpoint. Of course, like your backup safeties aren't typically like, hyper athletic in general, but there was some stuff that they were trying to ask him to do, like run the pole in the middle of the field, like keeping up with really fast wide receivers. Like the Cardinals game was a good example. Like somebody ran right by him and ended up dropping a bomb from Kyler Murray. Should have been a 60+ yard play. But I do agree with what Alan's saying, though. I think he's good enough to play in the NFL, or at least compete in a training camp setting. Now, what does that mean for everybody else? That's really the thing that I take away from it, is like, does this open the door up for a guy like Ryan Watts? I think, somebody who is a really good tackler, does fit the mold of kind of the build that the Steelers have looked for at the cornerback position. I have some reservations about whether he'll be able to like hold up out there at the NFL level, but I do think he's physical and should project to be a pretty solid special teams player as well. So I'm interested to see if maybe that cracks the door open for him to make the 53-man roster.
That was my very first thought when I saw about Trenton Thompson, was like internally, knowing like we're going to have additions to the roster outside of this, and we'll talk about that in a second. But like internally, this made me think, oh, this opens the door for Ryan Watts. Must be impressed with the work that he's done this spring. Alan has talked a lot about, him being probably better suited to play strong safety as opposed to cornerback. Derrick, it feels like the way you were talking about the reservations there, kind of share that sentiment. So yeah, I'm curious to see what this means for training camp. Now, does he win the job as the fourth safety, if you will? We know Miles Killebrew is going to be on the roster strictly for what he brings from a special teams perspective. Can like Jalen Elliott maybe push for a spot too? Is that kind of who the competition would be between right now? And assuming that there isn't like an external addition at safety.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too, like veteran safety options, especially like guys that are on like their third deal or whatever, like you can get those guys cheap on the open market. There will be plenty of safeties that become available, that can at least be thrown in there for reserves. I mean, you look at the Steelers, not that he played extraordinary ball, but they picked up Eric Rowe last year in the middle of the season just off the couch. I mean, there are always kind of guys like that have experience. Safety is not considered a premier position in the NFL, and like they're just not coveted that way. So you can sometimes get those guys on the open market. But I think my favorite thing about Watts is like just like watching his tape at Texas. I mean, you look at just some of the missed tackle numbers. Like he had 30 tackles last season, but a 2.5 missed tackle rate. I mean, that's incredible for a cornerback. That's definitely what you would expect from a guy that's over 6'2", over 200 pounds, really good size. But he brings some pop as a tackler, and I think that there's some value in that, especially if you're projecting him into like more of a different role in like the Steelers scheme.
Yeah, I definitely think if there's somebody who's a big benefit from this move, it's Watts. But I'm not sure how many safeties they're going to keep either. Like Miles Killebrew is clearly going to make the team. Not that like I would expect them to play him at safety a whole lot. He had a role in the goal line package over the last couple of years. That's basically it. But like when I look at this new kickoff thing, like I think I want a lot more linebacker bodies in terms of special teamers than I do defensive back bodies. And I think the Steelers have like a lot more. Like I feel very good about Devontae KZ, Deshaun Elliott, and Minka Fitzpatrick. Like I feel a lot more questionable about their cornerback situation. We don't know if Cam Sutton's going to be suspended and for how long. Corey Trice and Darius Rush are like upside guys, but they have no experience. You're talking about Beanie Bishop as an undrafted free agent, potentially being a day one starter. Like if I'm trying to stockpile depth somewhere on this team, it's probably linebacker and corner and not safety. So like how often, unless there's a major injury, is the four safety even going to play? So, I mean, I have them in my 53-man projection only keeping Killebrew and the three other safeties. Maybe this gets Ryan Watts on the team, but I'm not even sure that they will feel the need to do that. And I wrote this in my 90 Thoughts article from the weekend too, but don't be really surprised if you see not just guys like Ryan Watts and Logan Lee, but a whole bunch of guys who were day 3 draft picks this year getting cut. This was widely considered to be a very, very weak third day of the draft. I think a lot of these guys are going to get into training camp settings and not compare especially favorably to like the practice squad types that teams have had laying around and find themselves getting cut this August. That really wouldn't surprise me very much at all.
You have do you have 5 linebackers that like Mark Robinson also make?
Yeah, I have Mark Robinson on the team. 5 inside linebackers and 4 edges. I mean, if they had another edge that I think they liked, you could probably flip that. But I mean, certainly I think Watts is like probably like right now, I would say without Trenton Thompson around, I would put him as like the first guy off the 53 on defense, which means it only takes one injury. You're probably going to get more than one of those. But yeah, I mean, right now, I don't know. I don't know that safety is like a huge priority for them. I think they only kept 4 last year too. The year before they kept 5, but KZ was hurt. Like I don't know. I don't think they'll be like. I don't think this like opens a hole or something where that they need to fill. Like I think it is weird though that it was Thompson. Like I don't think he was the worst safety on the team. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I will say even before Trenton Thompson being cut, I kind of like the idea of Watts on the roster, not necessarily for anything that he would do in any defensive packages, but you just mentioned with the kickoff and kick return, like just his special teams value. Derrick mentioned the missed tackle percentage. That happened in like week 1 last year. So he had 0 missed tackles after like week 1 last year at Texas. I just think that he could bring something special teams, even if you're not going to see him on defense at all. But again, I get that spaces are limited. He's going to be on the bubble. I just think it's going to be an interesting conversation and something to monitor throughout training camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like, regardless of who it is, whether it's, Mark Robinson or, a guy like Ryan Watts, I think when you're talking about the, let's just say like 45th to 53rd guys on the roster, like you're talking about what value are you bringing from a versatility or from a special team standpoint? Like what can you do on special teams to set yourself apart? How many different, packages or positions are you capable of playing at like a close to baseline level? Because again, these guys are backups. They're not going to necessarily be guys that are going to excel at a ton of different things, but are you able to be put on the field and not look completely lost? I think that, that's where probably Watts has the most value in terms of, can he carve out a role for himself? I think Mark Robinson last year, like I went back and watched a couple games of tape on Monday and just to kind of see like some of the struggles that they had down the stretch against like good offenses, like what Buffalo did to them in the playoffs and things like that. And I one of the takeaways that I had was like Mark Robinson had some good moments against the run. I think it matches like what everybody kind of thinks of him as like a downhill thumper. But, he was really he made some really good plays in terms of like fitting in the right gap, scraping over the top. Of course, like he's a guy who is really physical and enjoys that element of the game as well. So I don't want to completely write him off. And of course, we've talked about injuries, potentially getting guys on the roster or taking them off. The inside linebacker position is a big question mark, right? Like Cole Holcomb has been a guy, he's never stayed healthy. So like, and there's a lot of question marks on like what he's going to look like when he does return. And then, of course, Peyton Wilson has the long list of injury concerns as well. He's been healthy the last 2 years, but, the inside linebacker position was a spot that was decimated last year. So the more guys that you have that, have some level of experience, I think is good. And it'll be interesting to see like who secures, those last couple spots.
Another thing, we're talking about the bubble, and there's so many guys on the defensive line that are going to be on that bubble. You mentioned Logan Lee there, Allen, DeMarvin Leal, Isaiah Loudermilk, guys that could be fighting for just a couple spots or maybe just one spot between those three. Who knows? And I think it brings up an interesting conversation, not just for this year, but going forward. We talked about, obviously, Keenu Benton. We all think he's, going to be one of their breakout guys this upcoming year and probably their only long-term piece. So, like, looking past 2024 and beyond, what is the state of the defensive line beyond Keenu Benton, and what is his role going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting question, right? I mean, I was in a scrum with Carl Dunbar during minicamp, and Mike DeFabo from The Athletic was asking him, like, hey, can he play 5 technique? Like, can you get him on the field more? And, I mean, get him on the field more question is probably not really related to where he plays. But, I mean, Carl Dunbar's answer was like, yeah, he could probably play the 5 technique, but why would he want him to? Like, he's playing well. I just think it's an interesting question, like, I think Keenu Benton's one piece of this puzzle. He clearly can be a nose tackle. I think he's probably better suited to be an up the field 3 technique defensive tackle. Like, how do you want to build around? If that's the one piece, I think how you want to build around him for the rest of this defensive line. Cam Hayward's here for a good time, not for a long time. I do expect the deal will get done to keep him here through another year or two beyond 2024, but that's about it. And I do think that defensive tackle is going to be one of the positions we're going to talk about a lot in the build up to next year's draft. I think it's kind of interesting to think about, like, what would be the ideal piece? Like, what does it look like? How do you want to build this line with that one piece in Keenu Benton? I don't know that him at nose tackle is something I really care about too much more going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, getting him at the nose tackle last year kind of made sense because there was an obvious hole there. They needed a player there. He had the background from Wisconsin. They were playing him a lot at like zero tech, over the center. But I think a lot of the people, including myself, like coming out, like really projected him more to be playing towards like in the B gap, as more of a a three technique. But I think for me, the body types have changed a little bit at nose tackle. If you want a little bit more upfield presence or more of a disruptor in the backfield, like you can get somebody that's, quicker like Benton is, still strong, but not necessarily the old school like plugger type. For me, I think, Alan wrote that piece today and I was saying on Twitter, like, Benton has been my guy for the past like couple months that people have asked about, like, who do you think is going to break out? Like, I kind of exclude like the Joey Porter Juniors, the George Pickens out of that category because we already seen what they can do. But a guy like Benton, who I think had a solid rookie season, maybe a little bit underrated to the masses. I think Benton's really that guy that's going to take the next step. And even if it is playing, him at nose tackle and base, that is fine with me. Even though I do agree, like he could probably be a better three technique just with his body type. My concern is you do have to get him on the field more. Like I think that was something that was a little bit mismanaged throughout the rookie season. I understand the fact that you're trying to make sure this dude doesn't hit the rookie wall, but when you look at the juice that this dude has off the ball, the way that he plays the run, some of the progression that I saw from him as a pass rusher, really from the Senior Bowl last year all the way towards the end of the year, there was a lot to be really excited about. And like if you look at like the third down pass rush snaps, like on third down last year, he only rushed the passer 53 times. I mean, like you want like sack production, you want disruption. Like those are the premier chances. I mean, you're looking at guys like Larry Ogunjobi had 132 pass rush snaps. I mean, why in the world would Ogunjobi be nearly tripling Benton just based on what we've seen last year? I mean, even guys like Montrevious Adams out-snapped him on third down. And, for me, in those third down packages where you're going like 4-down stuff, you're going to have your two edges, your two defensive tackles, Benton has to play there more. Like, I understand that, like, Cam and Ogunjobi have, like, the experience over him or are getting paid more, but you got to put the best guys on the field. And I think, like, it's going to be hard for them, I feel like, this year to keep him off the field just because I feel like he's going to ascend into that type of player.
I think so, too. But I think when you're looking, like, I'll be interested to see if, like, you could, like, I want Cam Hayward playing as an end in the base for sure. I think he's one of the best ever to really play that specific role. But like sub packages, I mean, like he wasn't great at rushing the passer when he came back from that injury last year. Now I expect him to have a little bit more juice this year than he did playing 50% last year. But like that's where Benton has to play. I don't care if he plays nose tackle. Like I don't like doesn't bother. Like great if he does. I don't care if he doesn't. Whatever. Like Montrevious Adams is fine at nose tackle too. Braden Fajoko's probably the best nose tackle on the team if you want to be real about it. Like just in terms of nose tackle play. But they got to get Benton on the field in those sub packages. I think that's essential. And I think that's kind of the thing I'm talking about is like they still build this defense like it's a 3-4 team that like only plays two of its defensive linemen sometimes. Like if I'm like trying to find another star, like if I'm using a first round pick on another defensive lineman, I just want another three technique. I don't care who plays the 0 in base. I don't care who plays the 5 in base. Like all they really need is another Keanu Benton.
Yeah. I mean, just like the old school, like, if you look at Sports Info Solutions, some of the defensive personnel, like how often they're playing like 3-down stuff. I mean, it's well less than 50%. I mean, it's not like it was back in the, early 2000s or anything.
I'd be surprised if it was 25%, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean,
it'd be closer to 20.
They have it, in terms of like their base 3-4-4, they have it at like 25%. And then like you got your nickel stuff, but some of the lines can get blurred there as far as like what they categorize edges as, whether it's defensive linemen or linebackers, but neither here nor there. I think like the big thing for me is just going back to the fact that like Benton has got to play. I mean, and like I know Smitty talked about like guys on the edge of the bubble in terms of like there's a lot of question marks I think that are valid in terms of what's behind those guys. Even with Cam, like let's just say in the hypothetical scenario that, Cam's pass rushing numbers have declined 3 straight seasons. Like there's probably, even if we expect a little bit of a bounce back because of, him being fully healthy. I don't see like him getting, I mean, we're not going to get like 2020 version of Cam as a pass rusher. I just don't see that happening, but I feel really good about the starters that they've got. Ogunjobi's inconsistent. Cam's a great run defender. I still think he has some value as a pass rusher. I already said that Benton's an ascending player. What happens behind those guys, I think, is more of a question. Because, like, I'll be honest with you, I don't feel great about literally anybody off the bench on the defensive line. And, like, yeah, those three guys are going to handle the lion's share of responsibilities, especially on important downs. But I don't feel like 100% great about anyone that they've got or are currently developing.
I agree. That's why, like, I'm not trying to make like a bigger deal about it than it is, but like something as subtle as like the loss of Armin Watts from just like what he could do from a pass rush perspective off the bench. Like they lost that, and I don't really feel like that was replaced necessarily. Like Dean Lowry's a different type of player that they brought in to replace that.
Yeah, I feel like if you get on a long drive and like you give up like 3 first downs in a row and it's 1st and 10 and you want to get those starters out of there and you got to put Mont and Dean Lowry and Isaiah Loudermilk out there as like a second unit, that doesn't scare me against the run. Like against the run, okay, I'm cool with those guys, but just know that none of those guys are getting to the pass rush, getting to the quarterback. Like that there's no pass rush juice whatsoever with that second group. Now, maybe an ascendant DeMarvin Leal, if he finally puts things together in his 3rd year, could change that formula a little bit. But right now, if you're getting pass rush from the defensive line, it is only those first 3 guys. How much of a problem is that? I mean, if they stay healthy, it's probably not a big deal. Like you probably don't need much more than those 3. But if there's an injury again, and you're talking about a 35-year-old and a player in Larry Ogunjobi who's rarely been fully healthy over the last 5 or 6 years, like I don't know. I don't know that they have. I honestly would be okay with them going out and getting just some pure pass rushing defensive tackle. Just go get someone that never plays the run and stash them on your bench and never use them until you need them, because like I think that's like that they could use one of those.
What's really discouraged me about this conversation is the lack of the amount of, like, I know that we brought up just briefly there, and Derek brought up a little bit ago the amount of pass rush snaps that he had, but Larry Ogunjobi, like, he just turned 30. He got a brand new 3-year deal after a 1-year deal here prior to last season. I feel like he should be a bigger part of this conversation, but due to injuries and really lack of production, he's not. Like, he shouldn't be somebody that we're writing off totally as being like a long-term part of this defensive line.
Yeah, I think with Ogunjobi, man, like it's really like if you ask any of the teams that he's ever played on, like or like people that follow those teams, they'll tell you like he's just a player that's always been extremely hot and cold. Like there are some Sundays or some drives that he looks nearly unblockable, and then there's others that he just doesn't look like a factor at all. And it's not that his contract is like necessarily an anchor or anything like that. Like he's not making enough money to be in that conversation. But again, if you're going to pay someone close to 10 million or whatever, I think it's like 9 million average per year or something like that, you want them to be a factor, someone that you're at least bringing up in these types of discussions. Some of the other guys that were mentioning ahead of him, and he's better than all of the defensive linemen reserves that the Steelers have. But really for Ogunjobi, the funny thing is Ogunjobi's best games, at least as a Steeler, have almost always came against the AFC North, which is really funny because he's had some really good games against Cleveland. I think one of his games, his best games last year, I want to say was like that first Baltimore game, if I remember correctly. Like there was some other games like in the AFC North, like 2022 that he had that were really good as well. So I don't know, maybe he just gets juiced up to play like some of his former teams. He's played in Cincinnati, he's played in Cleveland, but yeah, I mean, I think that going back to kind of the wild card of it all is probably still Leal. I think that the results have been so poor when he's played, and like I was happy with where the Steelers drafted him. I thought that they got solid value a couple years ago when he ended up falling to the 3rd round. But man, like I don't know what's happened. I don't want to blame like coaching, because I think that Carl Dunbar is one of the best at what he does, and I've heard so many players talk so highly of him. But he has a worse pass rush plan now than he did in college, and like that's just not typically the trajectory that you see for guys like coming out like that are were once touted as like potential 1st round picks, like Leal was entering his last season going into the SEC. But I mean, like last year, if you just watch his tape on his pass rush snaps, he's just coming off the ball. He has no clue what he's doing. It almost looks like he's trying to be a power rusher, and he's lost everything else really in his repertoire. And, you know, I don't know. This is a make or break year for him. I don't even 100% consider him a 53-man roster lock at this point. Like,
Agreed.
he's going to have to prove himself. And Alan mentioned the fact that, like, you know, depending on who becomes available and what these guys look like in training camp. And I'm cool. Like, a lot of these depth positions that we're talking about, every team in the NFL has some of these same concerns, right? Like, you don't have 53 studs. Like, it's just the reality of it. And you can roll the ball out in training camp and see what these guys look like in the preseason, yada, yada, yada. But like, if I don't see anything encouraging from Leal in the preseason when he gets out there, if he doesn't show us anything, or, you know, Loudermilk doesn't take a step forward, or if Adams is really the same player he's been over the past year or two, I absolutely wouldn't hate them, you know, paroling the free agency market to see who gets cut, you know, late July, early August or whatever, to try to bolster some depth, just in case, you know, Ogunjobi gets hurt again, something like that, or Cam gets hurt again, you know, to have some sort of emergency plan.
I've had the thought cross my mind too, and this is more of like a, you know, beyond this season as we get to draft time and stuff like that. And this is just, again, a thought that crossed my mind just because of the way that like Andy Weidel has operated in the past, and seemingly the Steelers have prioritized the trenches over the last couple of years. But, you know, not for sure, but hopefully they feel like they've now finished off replenishing the offensive line, hopefully, and gotten a lot of answers there. Could they just turn their attention now to the other side of the trenches now that we've seen how much they like prioritize the trenches in general? They've hopefully finished off the offensive side. Now it's time to give the defensive side attention. Now, again, that could change because you don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be. Who knows if they're going to acquire a wide receiver too that is here for beyond this year, what that solution is going to be like. But I had that thought cross my mind. Okay, hopefully the offensive line is done now. Do we turn our attention to the defensive line starting the 2025 draft?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking about the future needs, quarterback, wide receiver, defensive tackle, like, I mean, those are right there at the top. Like, there's nothing more important than that. And I absolutely could see them turn all those offensive line draft picks over the last 2 seasons into defensive line draft picks next season. Yeah, absolutely. Like, go draft 2 of them. I could totally see that. I'm just very curious to see what they're going to prioritize. I still feel like we get very like mixed messages from the Steelers about what they want out of their defensive line. I think that's part of the problem with DeMarvin Leal too, like where he's been asked to do like a bunch of different stuff. They played him some at outside linebacker. Was he an edge? Was he a D tackle? Like, not everybody can play 0 to 9. Like, some guys need to have like a pretty narrowly defined role. And I think it's hard to do when you're like, oh, our base defense is a 3-4. So we need guys that can play 0 and 4-eye, but also 3/4 of the time, or 65% of the time, we're in a 4-man front and we need 3 techs only, and that's it. And like, they have this weird, like I don't understand Logan Lee. Like, I just, like, that guy is not a 3 tech. He is a 5 tech at best. Like, maybe he's an edge. I don't know. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like they have I'm with you. I think Carl Dunbar is a really good defensive line coach. It just seems like there's this friction between like what they think they are on paper and the way they actually end up playing that doesn't seem to add up to me.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this, like, a discussion that I kind of had that was really eye-opening at the combine with another team's, like, basically a scout that was really high up. It was for the Saints, but he was telling me, like, one of the most important conversations that they have before the NFL combine from an organizational standpoint is they get together and they talk about, with the position coaches, they give them all like 15 minutes of like, okay, what are the top, you know, X number of traits or top things that we think we need help with at the next level? Like, what would you look for if you were building like your ideal player to add to your rooms? And they give the coaches, you know, a chance to, you know, go on and, you know, spill the beans on like what they want or whatever. But I think that there could be some miscommunication there in terms of, you know, when I think of like maybe guys that are tweeners or don't really necessarily have a home on the teams that drafted them, since that conversation a couple of years ago, I always kind of think back to that conversation as far as is this a miscommunication between like what the scouting department's looking for, what the general manager thinks that the defense really necessarily needs, and then maybe a miscommunication with, the coaching staff in terms of like, how do we develop this sort of player? And like, maybe all those guys aren't necessarily on the same page. And like with Leal, I think that could definitely be a valid, excuse. You could call it an excuse, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. The defensive line depth is definitely a point of concern and something that, will be like, it seems like we're making maybe a little bit bigger of a deal of it than it really needs to be like right now. But I think that it's important to note that injuries do happen. Like, you're not going to get into November, December with the same 11 guys on defense. Like, depth is important. And some of these conversations can definitely be had instead of, talking about Brandon Ayuk, I guess, like every single day or whatever, like other people want to do. I don't know, but that's just my take on it. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something to watch for throughout camp.
Speaking of, go check out yesterday's episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive where we talk about Brandon Ayuk.
You guys and everybody else. I mean, we're all guilty of it.
I wanted to ask you that last thing that you just mentioned, though, kind of put this thought in my mind. Like, not only how important is Keanu Benton right now, but for the future, like when you don't have, the guys behind him, like I think that the argument is there that he's like one of the more important players on this team for their future because of the state of that room right now.
No, 100%. 100%. Like, I mean, you got to think about it. Cam's got, I mean, the time's definitely ticking on Cam's clock in terms of how much longer he's going to be able to do this. I'm with Alan. I do think that Cam is going to get, I think they're going to get something worked out for short term. I do think it's a difficult and tricky negotiation all across the board, but I think something will probably get done. But Benton, you look at the guys, they've got a lot of stars on defense, some of which, a lot of which are still in their primes. But you look at the defensive line, like when he's the only guy that you really feel great about, a year or two from now, as far as like being potentially a really good player. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of pressure on his shoulders. But I just look at, what we got to see of him last year and what I saw off his college tape. I'm pretty optimistic that I don't think he's not going to be Cam, or probably won't ever be like necessarily maybe a Pro Bowl type player, but I do think that he can be an impact player and somebody that you can really build around on the defensive line. And the good news is too, like for anyone just like curious, the interior defensive line class for next year's draft is very good.
Oh yeah, they're going to pair Keanu with like Mason Graham, and we're going to be fine.
It's very good. So there's a lot of really talented players, and the interior defensive line position in general, like it's getting a lot of love right now. The NFL teams are paying those guys like crazy, especially guys that can rush the passer from the interior. So it's going to be interesting to see, kind of going back to our conversation, what type of body type or player type they pair with Benton, for the future.
Tomorrow, 2025 mock draft. We'll just go straight from my actual in-depth football talk.
Yeah.
Mock draft. Let's do it.
There we go. Yeah. With DB sandwich in between. The people will love it. Anything else?
There was one question from YouTube that
that's right. Yeah, I
got
it.
To get to.
Mr. Man 3523. You guys really don't think not extending Cam, not picking up Najee's option, and still being nearly 16 mil under the cap on top of releasing a receiver means anything?
Yeah, I mean, they're not really 16 mil under the cap. I mean, they have that cap space right now. It takes like $4 million to sign a practice squad. You got 1.9 to sign the last two players on the roster, which don't count right now. They usually like to go into the season with somewhere around 10 million in leftover money for in-season moves. So if you're not awful at math, that's almost 16 million right there. Like, so they don't get me wrong, they can make the cap space. And in fact, extending Cam Hayward is one of the biggest things they can do to make the cap space. But they don't, it's not like Omar is sitting on a Scrooge McDuck sized pile of cash right now, like just waiting to spend it. Like they can, and like do the thing is that anything that they do to make this room, whether it's extend Cam or restructure Minkah Fitzpatrick or restructure TJ Watt, just pushes money into 2025. So if they don't need it for this year, it's better for the team to keep it in 2024. No, the cap situation shouldn't make you think that a move is or is not happening. They're about where they usually are with regards to the salary cap right now anyway, or at least they're about where they'd like to be. Maybe that's a better way to say it, since they're infrequently where they'd like to be. But yeah, that doesn't. And the 2 roster spots, man, they're gonna have a punter and a long snapper on this roster that are not on this roster by the time we get to Latrobe. I can almost guarantee it. So no, I don't think that 2 roster spots mean anything other than that.
Yeah. The only thing I would say about that too, like with the cap space thing, did a good job breaking it down. I mean, there is other allotments that need to be taken into account there that a lot of people probably are missing necessarily when they see that $60 million number. I would just 100% point out though, like they have money available. Like you mentioned the Cam Hayward extension. Yeah. I mean, the TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick restructures, I think, account for like 17, 18 million. If you look at the Steelers, I think we could do a completely different episode about this. And it's something that I've been meaning to write about over the past couple of weeks, just haven't got the time to. But really, I think it's an interesting conversation to have. Are the Steelers all the way in, or are like, I don't think they're all the way out on the 24 season, but are they really all the way in? Or are they kind of just 1 foot in, 1 foot out? Because if you look at it, like they're 30th in cash spending. I mean, they're 30th in cash spending right now. Like they're like in a restructure to 1 or 2 of those guys would get them up towards like more towards the middle of the pack. So that's when I think of like, another move, not necessarily, necessarily needs to be Ayuk, but like, for example, another move like that is going to take on additional responsibility, or an extension, for a guy like Cam, it would clear cap space, but it does obviously add cash that you're going to be doling out. They've got several guys that they could potentially extend. I'm interested to see what that number looks like by the time we get to, I don't know, like week 2 or week 3 of the preseason, because I do think that they still have some cash that they need to spend this offseason, whether that's securing guys on the roster, giving them long-term contracts. I think there's a number of players that they are talking to right now that, deserve those type of deals. But, it's a conversation nonetheless. But yeah, that $16 million number doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to go, trade for somebody tomorrow and just plop that in there and they're just going to roll the ball out in September. It's not really how that works.
And you don't even honestly need that much cap. Like you might not need that much cap space. You can sign Brandon Ayuk to a 5-year, $150 million contract with 4 void years on the end of it, and his cap hit this year's $3 million. It doesn't. The cap space that's available right now doesn't say that much about what they may or may not do. It's about, like you said,
the contract that you just laid out was so wild that I want it to happen now.
It's not that
9
wild.
years long.
I
know it's not that wild, but
it's not that wild. Like I can come up with wilder ones, but it's about
Friday's episode.
It's about what's available, and that number doesn't mean anything. Is I guess as is the point. That number could say 0 right now, or it could say, if they restructured TJ and Minkah and extended Cam, it would say 46 million or something like that, and their situation would not have really changed any. Like, because we know they can do all those things, they just haven't yet. It's like my bank account balance is $500, but I've got $1,000 in my couch cushions. I can buy something that costs $1,500. It doesn't matter what my bank account balance says. Like, it's just accounting at that point. They can do it. That number doesn't mean anything.
So you're gonna be one of those split payment people, though, which I hate. So
if you're spending $1,500 on something, you can be a split payment person. I'm sorry.
All right, Derrick, tell the people they can find you.
At Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube, and then all my written work at SteelersNow.com.
There we go. Also, new video yesterday, right? If you want to tell the people to check it out.
New video today, too.
Today?
Right?
I didn't see today's.
Well, that was, today's video for what Alan's referring to. Yeah, I went through and watched, cut up a bunch of stuff for Arthur Smith's, like, red zone rushing concepts, like, basically talked a little bit about the zone read stuff that he likes to do in the red zone, and then trying to figure out ways to design some package plays around Justin Fields. So if you guys are interested in that, you can go check that out. It's like 20 minutes long or whatever, but a lot of video example, show you guys different things that you can do with the quarterback run game. So
yeah, 20 hours ago, the video was posted. The article might have came out for it, but I was going based off the YouTube YouTube video, seeing it there in my channel. So there we go. And Alan, tell the people where they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. Like and subscribe to YouTube channel, hit that bell for notifications. Tell your friends, neighbors, your pets. It's hot outside. Just sit inside and come watch YouTube videos. It's great. It's what everyone, all the kids are doing it. My daughter hasn't been off her phone in like 72 hours.
All the kids are doing it. Hopefully, while she's been on her phone, she is followed. She was after.
I don't know if she follows us on TikTok, and I don't know if I want her to or not. Let me just. I don't know. I'm
it would
iffy on
probably
that one.
drastically change her algorithm if she was following us.
Probably
So,
not a lot of
if you are
football
on
in her
TikTok,
algorithm. I'm gonna guess.
If you are on TikTok, though, be sure to follow us over there. Follow us everywhere. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Hit us in the comments with a question. We appreciate the question that we're able to get to today. So give us some more of those to answer on a future episode. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH, for Alan Saunders, Derrick Bell, and myself. Thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.